Welcome to Lecture 8, Theories of Foreign Policy Decision-Making, Bureaucratic Politics. Introduction. In the last lecture, we examined the rational actor model used by political scientists in their explanation of foreign policy actions. In this lecture, we want to examine another model called the Bureaucratic Politics Model. Objectives. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to discuss the Bureaucratic Politics Model, identify the basic assumptions of the model, explain the limitations of the model. Theories of Foreign Policy Decision-Making, Bureaucratic Politics. The first thing we want to do is to have an understanding of what bureaucracy means. Harold Lasky, in the 1930 Encyclopedia of the Social Sciences, defined bureaucracy as a system of government, the control of which is so completely in the hands of officials that their power jeopardizes the liberties of ordinary citizens, the characteristics of which include a passion for routine in administration, the sacrifice of flexibility to rule, delay in the making of decisions, and a refusal to embark upon experiment, in extreme cases resembling a hereditary caste, manipulating the government to its own advantage. Max Weber referred to it as an organization of an administrative hierarchy, characterized by loyalty to the office, a highly specialized division of labor, and impersonal relationships based on prestige, power, and control. Thus, the central defining features of bureaucracy are the formalization and standardization of procedures. 2. Departmental structures based around specialization and technical expertise. 3. The presence of hierarchical authority as a way of coordinating the specialized departments and formalized procedures. The bureaucratic politics model of foreign policy argues that policy decisions are not made by rational choice, nor by a unitary actor. Rather, foreign policy outcomes result from a game of bargaining among a small, highly placed group of governmental actors. These actors come to the game with varying preferences, abilities, and positions of power. Participants choose strategies and policy goals based on different ideas of what outcomes will best serve their organizational and personal interests. Bargaining then proceeds through a pluralist process of give and take that reflects the prevailing rules of the game as well as power relations among the participants. Because this process is neither dominated by one individual nor likely to privilege expert or rational decisions, it may result in unpleasant outcomes that fail to fulfill the objectives of any of the individual participants. Most discussions of bureaucratic politics begin with Graham T. Allison's 1969 article in the American Political Science Review, Conceptual Models and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Although this work built on earlier writings by Charles Lindblom, Richard Neustadt, Samuel Huntington, and others, Allison provides an analysis of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is a major confrontation between the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics (USSR) that occurred in 1962 over the issue of Soviet-supplied missile installations in Cuba. For these theories, three key questions guide one understanding of the policy-making game. Who are the actors? What factors influence each actor's position? And how do actors' positions come together to generate governmental policies? Prominent scholars of the bureaucratic politics model, David Kozak and James Kigel, identify 12 defining characteristics of the model, drawing on the works of others. These are: 1. Since the end of World War II, non-elected officials have become increasingly important in making public policy. 2. Bureaucratic decisions can be affected by circumstances exogenous to the agency's internal environment, namely interest groups. 3. Bureaucrats are driven by agency's self-interest in order to maintain political power. 4. National security policy is often the result of these struggles for power between competing bureaucracies. 5. Individuals positioned in a bureaucracy will naturally adopt that agency's goal. 5. Because of their expertise, implementation responsibilities, and longevity, elected officials are often dependent on bureaucrats in the realm of policy making. 7. Notwithstanding times of national crisis, bureaucratic politics is characterized by bargaining, competition, and compromise. 8. By maintaining support for the existing bureaucratic structure, clientele groups gain influence in bureaucratic politics. 9. As clientele groups provide bureaucracies with information, bureaucracies in turn provide information to political institutions, allowing agencies both to influence policy and defend their own interests. 10. The executive plays a fundamental role in bureaucratic politics by coordinating and weighing bureaucratic interests. 11. Bureaucratic agencies' primary goal is self-preservation. Therefore, these agencies will seek structural alterations to maximize their own political benefits. And 12. Bureaucratic politics theory raises questions as to its appropriateness in a system that is supposed to be run by elected officials. The preceding 12 points are premises that can provide insight in the actual functioning of a modern government. A number of criticisms have been made against the model. Some critics have pointed out that the model concentrates too much on the policy-making process and not on the content of policy, thereby ignoring the external environment, which is important in the understanding of state behaviors. Limitations of bureaucratic politics model. Let me briefly highlight some of the major criticism of the model. 1. Though the bureaucratic politics model has been used to describe decision-making in many different contexts, it is most commonly applied to America's foreign policy. This focus has meant that the theory remains underdeveloped in many policy areas. Some critics argue that the model is rigid and it ignores external factors, which make it difficult to adapt to changing conditions in the international system. The model gives little room for national interest. Rather, it promotes group or corporate interests. 4. Because the bureaucratic politics model has most often been applied to studies of crisis decision-making, critics have also asserted that its value for explaining ordinary policy-making, particularly over time, is limited. The model has also been criticized for giving inadequate attention to the role of the public, interest groups, and the legislature in the formation and implementation of foreign policy. 6. Some have expressed worries about the implications of the bureaucratic politics model for government accountability. If government decisions cannot be traced to individual policymakers, but rather result from an opaque process of give and take among both elected and unelected leaders, assigning responsibility and therefore accountability for these activities becomes far more difficult. In other words, the model removes responsibility from government. It makes it much easier for politicians to deny responsibility for policy outcomes. Summary: the bureaucratic politics model posits that foreign policy decisions are the outcomes of bargaining among bureaucratic groups having competing interests. 2. Decisions reflect the relative strength of the individual bureaucratic players or of the organizations they represent. Decisions made are determined not by rational choice, but through give-and-take bargaining process conducted by government agencies. The model is rigid and focuses mainly on the roles of agencies of government. End of lecture 8. Thanks for listening.